Hello and welcome to the Glowface Digital Wellbeing podcast. I am, of course, your host, David Talbot, and this week, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see that I am not alone. I am joined by two individuals, one being Chris Williamson, the podcast host of the very famous Modern Wisdom podcast, and the other one being Dr. Andrew Huberman, equally as famous podcaster of the Huberman Lab podcast. Now, I wanted to spend some time today going through their conversation because they had a podcast together a few weeks ago and they spent a lot of time talking about digital well-being, about the impact of screens, and I think some really great content to delve into, and hopefully I can supplement what they're saying, what they're talking about, and give my own thoughts, disagree on a few points, but also provide my perspective on the conversation. So I guess this is a bit of a reaction video, whatever you want to call it. But hopefully here an opportunity to review the content that they've put out and just see how this applies to the world of digital well-being. Likely going to split this up into two different segments, two different episodes or podcasts, because it's going to be a fair bit of content to get through. So I hope you enjoy the conversation as we listen in, and then I'll be pausing along the way to provide my thoughts. But let's get right into it as Chris kicks off the conversation.
Now, how worried are you about how technology is impacting people's ability to focus?
Adult ADHD is clearly upon us. It's just clear. And so
I think that's a great point. So many adults are complaining all the time that they can't focus, they can't pay attention. If you've got Dr. Andrew Huberman saying it's just clear that adult ADHD is upon us, it's hard to argue with that perspective.
concerned.
You think that that's induced or facilitated or worsened by technology? Like, tell me what's going on in the brain. How's technology able to make such a dramatic change?
Yeah, I think let's turn it on its head. I'm not changing your question because I don't like it when people do that to me.
Answer what you want. Fine.
No, sometimes I'll ask
It's
you a question
show,
on my
Andrew. Do what you
podcast
want.
and people will flip. And they're like, I'm going to give you a different question. Answer that one. And I was like, okay, I'm going to answer your question a different way. The circuits in the brain that are required for setting and maintaining focus are inhibited by the process of deliberately shifting one's focus over and over and over throughout the day.
I think that's a great point. Just to touch on the circuits in one's brain are inhibited by the constant shifting of your attention, of your focus over and over again throughout the day. Effectively, what Dr. Huberman is saying is that your ability to think deeply is inhibited by the very fact that you constantly shift context and you constantly change your attention and you're constantly distracted. So it's just telling that you have here a world-renowned neuroscientist, public figure being quite forward and saying that there's almost no denying that screens are impacting our ability to focus and pay attention on one thing for a sustained period of time.
In other words, if ever there was a physical activity that could undermine your cardiovascular exercise, it turns out not to be the case. But, there was this idea a few years ago that if you sit a lot during the day, it doesn't matter how much you exercise, it's not going to make a difference. That's not true, right? Exercise still helps. But we also know that moving and standing up and sitting down quite a lot throughout the day, getting as much, little walks and things like that is extremely beneficial and can amplify the already known positive effects of exercise. Okay. Well, when it comes to focus, much of what our schooling is about growing up is not just the content that we're taught, but our ability to sit still and pay attention, to keep the body still and to focus to some extent.
I think that's a good point to touch on, that focus isn't just about paying attention in important areas of your life. Focus is required for learning and schooling, and I think we see an inability to focus coming through into the education system, coming through into kids on a regular basis. This is where the conversation around focus, around ADHD comes up over and over again. Kids can't sit still in class, kids can't pay attention for a long period of time. And so not only is education about learning, about growing, but also can you sit still long enough to do those two things? And if you have devices, screens in the way of helping us achieve that outcome, they're going to be inhibitors to the learning and education process.
keep the body still. Some people gesticulate more, the Italians and in certain Arab countries and things like that. And other people are far more still. And we get back to this about body stillness a little bit later, because there's some emerging ideas on that are worth touching on. But the point is that if one is constantly moving their attention from one thing to the next, it undermines the stability of all the circuitry in the brain that's responsible for prolonged focus. Now, I partake in social media, so do you, but the scroll function is a practice of shifting focus while maintaining gaze in one location, right? Normally we would shift focus by looking here, by looking there. I mean, try this for 30 minutes tomorrow. If folks listening to this, take 30 minutes of your day and decide that you're only going to exist in the three-dimensional world, meaning you're not going to look at screens for 30 minutes. Okay, obviously screens, your phone has a depth to it, but you know what I'm talking about. You'll notice that your attention is shifting all the time. You're looking at a brick wall, then there's this, and there's you, but it's all harnessed by some sort of conceptual goal or physical goal, trying to get here, finish a conversation, complete an answer to a question. That's all within a tunnel of motivation. When you're on your phone and scrolling, and I think scrolling itself is the major issue, when you're scrolling, you're essentially putting yourself into new context after new context after new context, and the brain has to.
I think what Huberman said just there probably wasn't, stopped. We didn't stop long enough on that point. Is that scrolling is the major issue, and I guess what digital well-being is about is not about getting rid of screens and devices out of our day-to-day lives. These things form a part of our lives. We have to have screens and engaging computers and mobile phones and things. Yes, they're a part of our lives, but it's about identifying the parts of those devices that are unhealthy. And clearly, Dr. Huberman is saying that it's the scroll function in these devices that's unhealthy. If you sit there and you have 3 hours of screen time a day and it's scrolling, it's very, very different to 3 hours of screen time watching Huberman and Chris Williamson podcast on YouTube, right? Assuming that's the only thing that you're doing. But just, getting into the specifics around digital well-being, it's a great point that, you need to get more granular than just screens are bad or technology's bad. Getting granular into what is bad about it, well, it's the scroll function. That's really what's dangerous.
Adjust to all of that. And the way that the brain works, in addition to controlling heartbeat and autonomic function, et cetera, is, think about it, sort of I don't want to diss it, but I took my sister to see the Harry Potter play recently in New York. And while I wasn't a big fan of the script at all.
Was this the Half-Blood something? What was it called?
Yeah, it was the what is it? The Cursed Child
Cursed,
one?
Yeah. Me, Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray nearly got thrown out of that during COVID. I've got to tell you the story once you're done. It's one of the phenomenal thing that I saw. So you went to go and see it too.
My sister likes theater, and we go to New York each year for her birthday, and I took her to this show, and I wasn't a big fan of the script, to be honest. I only read one of the Harry Potter books, liked it, but then abandoned it. But she really likes the Harry Potter stories. I wasn't a fan of the script. That's just my uninformed opinion. But the effects were spectacular. Okay. And one of the things that occurred to me, they had this library there where the books are alive. And as I was watching this, I realized that that's very much how the brain works. That, for instance, when you walk into a room, it's a new context. And it would be the same as if you were walking through a library. And let's say you go to a soccer, European football game, and you sit down, and all of a sudden your brain calls up all these books about European soccer, and your favorite team is right there. And then you open that, and then all of a sudden, you're looking at that, something about your favorite team. What's your favorite team? Newcastle. Okay. And then unbeknownst to you, this is the important part. The books all around you, not the one you're looking at, are now changing to the competitors and the history of that team, but also who's the directly antagonistic rival team.
Sunderland.
Sunderland. Okay,
yeah,
Sunderland.
There it is, baby.
Okay. So that's the way the brain works. It's calling up context, so that it makes it very easy to flit to a discussion about a particular rivalry in a particular year, in a particular match, in a particular point and player. That's focus. Focus is not about maintaining a single tunnel of cognition. Focus is about calling to mind all these additional contextually relevant batches of information that you might need. And the reason I use the analogy of the Harry Potter library is that it's a dynamic library. So the moment we're done here and we walk out, yes, some of the books, so to speak, of this conversation will linger with us, but whatever we're focused on next, whatever goal-directed behavior we have, making it to dinner or through traffic or wherever we're going, will call up a new library. Now, some people might say, well, duh, of course it works that way, but it's not duh, because it's very dynamic. Now, social media is the opposite of that. It's one library. Next account, another library. Next account, another library. Next account, another library, another library, another library. And the brain is calling up all these different libraries in rapid succession.
Wow.
So when
I think that is probably the best explanation I've ever heard of what it means to be distracted on social media, is the constant context shifting. It's and I think it's a great example of what we talked about a few weeks ago around shallow versus deep thinking. When you're thinking deeply, you're in a library in the context of, let's keep using his analogy around European soccer, in the context of European soccer, and you're in that library, and to think deeply means you're pulling out all the books. You're really thinking and you're reading and you're looking at one book and you're pulling another book around, the rivalry or the history or the facts. You're taking time in that library to digest it, versus the shallow thinking is you view one library, you jump to the next, and you jump to the next, and then we form equally shallow opinions as we do just that. So it's a great way to conceptualize what it means to scroll through social media. And I guess really its analogy certainly feeds back into the shallow versus deep thinking part around around social media, around screen usage, that is just so dangerous.
I'll be honest, the selected choice of things to click on tells me a lot about what I've been clicking on, right? Obviously the algorithm is telling
yourself.
me.
Yeah.
I confess, and I'm really embarrassed to say, but not so embarrassed that I won't reveal, that what I find now on that gallery of things to select are street fights, so beat downs,
Yep.
and really adorable, strange animals or cute animals. I love the flora and fauna of life.
The duality of Andrew Huberman.
Yeah, right.
There.
And not the capybara. Like, if ever there was an uninteresting animal, it's the capybara. However, yes, the raccoon accounts are delightful to me. The Nature is Metal account is very
phenomenal.
Cool.
Yeah.
There's an extensive community of capybara enthusiasts on Instagram.
Which you're a member of?
No, I've actively avoided capybara accounts.
You're a big octopus guy, though.
I like cephalopods. I like cuttlefish. My lab used to work on cuttlefish and octopuses.
Octopi, Andrew, come
it's
on.
Octopuses. It's octopuses.
I've been taught for so long that it's octopi.
It's octopuses. And actually...
This is the most... Hang on. This is the most...
Lex is going to kill me because there was a meme about this because we did a live... Okay, so I know too much about this because my lab used to work on cephalopods, which are which are in the category of mollusks, include cuttlefish and octopuses. And so... It's octopuses is the correct plural, and
this is the most like groundbreaking piece of information that we've got so far today.
Moreover, the great Oliver Sacks, who's now unfortunately dead, is a neurologist and popular writer about the brain function. The man who mistook his wife for his hat, etc. A real hero of mine. Talked about this, that it's also platypuses, and he wrote about. You can look this up. He wrote about traveling to Australia and then going to the far north where they have a breeding program to reestablish the platypuses, and that the location of the breeding program, is literally the platypussery.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Oliver Sacks wrote about this. So I've long been interested in the platypus as an interesting animal. They're very interesting. Octopuses.
Yep.
Yeah, that's okay. Many
I'll get that. It's a revolution.
So does that mean that the plural is or that the location where they breed octopuses is the octopussery?
I hope so.
Okay.
I want to go there.
Yeah. Well, according to Oliver Sacks, this is the correct nomenclature, and he's the neurologist expert in cephalopods. So we can return to this at some point. I'm sure people will put in the comments where we're right, where we're wrong.
I'm absolutely
But either way, they will have gone out and researched and learned, and that's what
we're here for. I want to show you this video. We can put it up on the screen. Just press play on the middle of that, and let me know what you think.
Right. So for those listening who aren't watching, this is an image of a kid flipping back and forth between an iPad and a phone with incredible dexterity. This is a family out to dinner and the kids are watching screens. There's another kid without any phone in his hands, crying, attempting to swipe the phone that is not in his hand, as if scratching at an itch, but not successfully. And a kid actually tapping a screen in their sleep. Yeah. Yes, this is indeed, we are in the, thank you.
What do you think's going on there?
Yeah.
Pretty confronting images there about phone usage. I think the one at the restaurant's probably standard. I mean, no matter what restaurant you go to, you definitely see a kid on an iPad. It's very socially acceptable. I think the ironic part, actually, if you go back and watch that video again, that person having dinner, filming the kid watching the iPad, the person sitting across from them has their phone open on the table. I'm not sure what it's on it, but everyone's a bit distracted at that table anyway. So, bit of judgment there. But I think of the other ones, of the kids who's jumping between two devices, the kid who compulsively scrolling whilst in tears and the kid asleep. Firstly, I just wonder what the parents are doing videoing the children. I think, are they videoing it to share it for what capacity? It's a bit confronting in that sense, but clearly the extremes, I think, clearly and examples of how bad this can actually get. And particularly for kids, I think that's what's really confronting about that video. There's no adults in those videos doing things that are really, confronting like that. We see adults with other behaviors that are inappropriate, but we seldom see kids doing things that seem so confronting. And I think it's just telling that the inability for kids to control themselves when using these devices is just huge. I mean, they do not have the neurological apparatus to exhibit the self-control needed to not overindulge in these devices. And you can see when parents don't put boundaries in just how bad this can get.
And thanks for getting me out of the animal fights conversation. What's happening is very clear, which is that, the human brain is an incredible organ because it's a map of our experience. It has certain parts that are hardwired that govern our heart rate and control of our heart rate, or control of our breathing, certain immune functions, and on. But then a vast percentage of the human brain is open real estate that is designated as one function or another depending on what happens to you during development. So we know this for sure. My scientific great-grandparents won the Nobel Prize for this, David Huberman and Torrance and Weasel, that what you see during development, really between the ages of birth and about age 14 mainly, but certainly extending longer, creates a set of modules or maps within the brain that allow you to predict what's going to happen in the future. So if kids are growing up doing a lot of swiping behavior, remember, we're in the first time in human history where people have written with their thumbs also, right? Texting. There are entirely different maps of how language is encoded, how motor functions and language interact. In the past, meaning for tens of thousands of years, if not longer, gesticulating and speech and grunting and shouting and pointing is one of the primary modes of communication. It's not surprising, therefore, that the representation of the hands and the digits, which is nerd speak for fingers, is right next to the areas of the brain that are responsible for generating language and speech and language. So we now have the ability to speak with our thumbs, so to speak, no pun intended, by texting. We now have the ability to see many different contextual landscapes, as we talked about before, by swiping, typically up. Sometimes down, typically up, right? So the up swipe has become, perhaps as hard, not as mapped into the brain as the wave. Hi, what do you say to babies? Hi, people try and get their attention, get them to go wide-eyed, smile. They do peekaboo. These guys, people have been doing this for a very long time. Now, the swipe function is one of the ways in which human beings engage in the world. It's not as fundamental as opening one's mouth to eat, but it's pretty close. So the brain.
I think it's certainly the swipe function is definitely a way we engage with the world, inverted commas, but it's not necessarily the world. It's the digital world. It's not reality, I suppose, is key there. I think the other point to take away from what Huberman's saying there, from my perspective, is just how quickly these maps are encoded into kids' brains, right? These kids, very, very young, get a taste of what it's like to get dopamine from a device and just cannot stop. And those maps are just going to be hardwired into their brains all their lives. And that's the really, I think why screen time in children is such an important thing to moderate, such an important thing to set boundaries around, because just as he said, this is the formative years of a child's life, and the maps you put in their brains now are the maps that they'll have forever. And although yes, there's some neuroplasticity and those maps can be rewired in certain ways, it gets more difficult as a child gets older. And if you can create good sort of neurological maps early on for children, then it makes their lives a lot easier, right? Really, really interesting stuff there.
And it's just adapted to this. There's real estate set aside for whatever your experience was. And so what you're seeing there is just kids very adept at doing this, because it's always a trade-off. Huberman in part won the Nobel Prize for showing that plasticity of the brain, mapping of the brain for one particular sensory experience or function, say swiping or the ability to switch back and forth between multiple screens, is always, always at the expense of some other potential function. You can't do everything.
And you think about that comment in relation to shallow versus deep thinking, and what Huberman said earlier on, that our ability to focus is directly impaired by the fact that we're constantly shifting context all the time. You can't have both. You can't have it both ways. You can't pretend to be someone who pays attention, who focuses, who does deep work, who gets into states of flow, and then also engage in these devices in a distracted and unconsidered way, in an unhealthy way. You just can't have both. Your brain does not allow you to do both of those things effectively.
So when children are inculcating that particular habit, there is the Thomas Sowell quote, like, there are no solutions, only trade-offs.
Right.
I think I've got written on my whiteboard on my fridge at the moment, the 5 most common deathbed regrets. And it's things like, I wish that I'd not worked as much. I wish I'd let myself be happy. I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. It will be unbelievably surprising to me if in 40 years' time, I wish I'd spent less time on my phone isn't on there. I would bet pretty much everything that I have that would probably appear on average on people's 5 top deathbed regrets. I wish I'd spent less time on my phone. And we can see this happening in front of us. And the best way that you can tell that this is going to continue to happen is that you can reflect on what you did over the last week. And one of the most common things that you wish that you'd done less of over the last week was, I got captured. I did a couple of YouTube holes or TikTok scrolls or Instagram whatevers. And you know that this is happening in the micro. Spread that across a lifetime. I think that very much we're going to look back at this, and hopefully there is some kind of solution. Maybe it's Neuralink. Maybe, we have a way that we can kind of ethically engage with technology and get the communication and the stimulation and the exploration of different ideas and communities. But yeah, right now kind of feels a little bit like, maybe a little bit like when cigarettes first came out, like your doctor smokes Camels, like nobody knew what the bad effects of this were. They didn't know long-term what it was going to cause. And dude, that video, I really wanted to show it to you because
before they move on, he's touched on a few points there. Firstly, what's the solution? Digital Wellbeing, 100%. This is what Glowface is here for. What's the solution? Starting different narratives around creating better ways to help more healthily engage with technology. We can't just be passive consumers of these devices and these and technology. We have to be considered, and we have to do it in a thoughtful way, in a healthy way, rather than just sitting back and letting these devices take control of us like they took control of those kids in those videos, right? And this is 100% a micro versus a macro thing. The the older I've gotten, the more I realize you really just get to live one day at a time. And that sounds really a given. Like, of course, you don't get to live more than one, but what you do in that day determines what you do in your life, because one day that's it. That's practically your entire life, because you don't get to do more than one day at a time. And so if your micro in one day is 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours of screen time, this is your life. That's your macro. You add that up over a lifetime and bam, it's gone. It's done. That's what you get. That's it. That's all there is to it. This is why Glowface exists, is to help people realize that, hey, over the course of a life, if you spend more than 4 hours a day on your screen, if you live to be 85 years old, you've spent way over 10 years of your life looking at your phone. And that's just your phone. Your phone shows you once a week how many hours you spend on your phone. If it's 4 hours a week, I think that's every hour you spend is 3.5 years of your life. It's 14 years is for 4 hours, right? That's insane. No one wants to spend 14 years straight, no sleeping, nothing, 14 years of your life, over 85 years looking at your phone. And that doesn't include things like computers, emails, computer games, television, all the other screens we look at. You add that up and all you're going to do, all it feels like we're doing is spending a lifetime looking at our screens. I do not think the solution is more technology. It's absolutely not. Neuralink, I don't understand it. I don't know a lot about it. But what I do know is that we will not be controlled by the things that we hate. We'll be controlled by the things that we love. And if we love convenience, we want to make our life easy. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to plug myself into the mainframe and overcome this obstacle by making it easier. Then that's not how this is going to fix the problem. But I completely agree that in 40 years' time, the number one, I'm not even thinking top 5, the number one regret that we'll have is we spend too much time on our phones. We spend too much time looking at screens. We're never present. And that's what Glowface is here for. I'm just really passionate about that. It's entirely the mission statement of Glowface that we would provide practical tips to help people reduce screen time to get part of their life back. Like the Glowface, the book, is what we are losing to humanity and how we can take it back. And that's what the outward workings of this platform is. So, look, that's the first half of this conversation. Really, really enjoying giving my thoughts on it. I'm going to get into the next one next week, so stick around and listen in again next week. Thanks so much for taking the time. Hope you enjoyed it. And like I said, we'll be back again to review the second half of the Huberman, Chris Williamson conversation about phones and screens. Thanks so much.